Hello my beautiful butterflies, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Beverley and it is lovely to see you today. In this video we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of dressing vintage. So I've been dressing in the vintage style for a couple of years now and I really love it. It was probably the best decision I've ever made. I always wanted to dress vintage. I always preferred vintage styles but just kind of went along with it because I didn't know there was a whole group of people who dressed vintage all the time, and when I discovered them on Instagram and YouTube I was like, can I do that please? And that's what really inspired me. But there's a lot I've learned in the last couple of years and I thought it was important to be completely honest and talk about the pros and cons. So the first pro is that there is so much history, literally hundreds and hundreds of years of history and different styles and different types of clothing that you can try out and play around with. I love playing with styles. I do more like history bounding, which is where you dress similarly to certain time periods, you dress similarly to films and TV shows that are set in the periods. I love it, and there's so much to play with. Like I'm drawn towards like 20s, 30s, into the 40s and 50s a little bit. I love the 70s and late 60s. Those patterns were mwah. And I absolutely love Victorian and Edwardian, which is kind of what I'm going for today with this very cute camisole. I thrift a lot of my clothes and you can really find pieces that make you stand out and that you can play around with. So much fashion history. It's so fun to look into. I really love that about it. A con is most of these years and years and years of history, you can't actually buy the clothes, the original actual vintage clothing to wear. And if you do buy it, it's more of like a collector's item that you kind of just look at or have on display rather than actually wearing it. It's really hard to find these pieces. And on top of that, if you want to go for like reproductions on Etsy and places like that, they are really, really expensive. You can get things like Civil War era clothing that is on sale there, modern day clothes that somebody has made of that style, but it's expensive. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of pounds just for one dress. Who can afford that? Not many people, unfortunately. And so it's quite difficult to get into a lot of these styles. It's quite difficult to dip your toe in and try. Do I want to dress this way? Do I want to dress that way? And it might be that a film has come out, like when Little Women came out, suddenly everyone was like knitting patterns based on it, and it was so fun. But at the same time, it was very much like things were very expensive, and for those of us that are just kind of doing it for fun and because it's really nice to dress up, it's really difficult to afford. A pro about dressing in vintage is the community is really active. There are groups, thousands of groups on Facebook. There are so many profiles on Instagram. If you just follow my link to my Instagram down in the description and go through who I'm following, you will find so many vintage boys and gals, and it's so lovely to see such an active community. And on top of that, everybody's so friendly and welcoming. If you message somebody and you're like, I really want to make my Instagram better, how can I do this? Or how did you take this picture? Or how did you do that? They're more than likely going to reply, unless they're the big influencers, you know, they don't have the time. But quite often people are willing to help and give you a little bit of advice. And that is incredible. I know there's a lot of other groups and communities on Instagram and places that are not quite as welcoming to new people, but the vintage community is so nice. Con is that most of the vintage people live in America. There's quite a lot of them in America. It seems to be a whole thing that is over there. They have very active places like estate sales, and it's just a big thing over there. It seems to be very popular and very active. I struggle to find people in England, but the people that I have found are in London. So it's quite difficult to find people who will dress and hang out with you and want to meet up and do photo shoots and things in the UK. If you are in the UK and you'd like to meet up sometime and dress up in vintage clothes and do photo shoots, let me know in the comments. A really big pro to dressing vintage is it's a great way to find new hobbies. You can collect like specific things, like I know people who collect old purses or old gloves, or they'll collect accessories, or there's a whole sewing community who reproduce pieces of clothing from the past. There are companies that make patterns, and it's great to learn about the history and what was going on in the world at the time that you're enjoying dressing up. I think a lot of the time we can romanticize the past and think, oh, it was so lovely back then. But then when you start to look into like how society was, it can be very different to how we think it was. And I really enjoy learning about the history and why people chose to dress in certain ways, what society was like back then. It's so fun to learn. Then you know that about me. I love learning. A con is definitely that sewing is not easy. I'm currently trying to learn to sew. I've made 2 skirts. Now we're moving, so I can't sew at the moment, but as soon as I get settled, there'll be more sewing coming to the... As soon as we get settled in our new house, there will be more sewing coming to the channel. So don't forget to click that little subscribe button so you don't miss that. It's really hard to learn to sew. People very much sewed from when they were very little back then in the past. You know, everybody made their own clothes. And so to now see that, you know, I'm in my 40s and I'm just learning how to sew, and back in the day I would have been a child learning to sew. It would have been passed down through the family. It's really hard to do. I watch a lot of sewing here on YouTube by other vintage gals, and it's so fun to watch, but I definitely am reminded every time just how difficult it is. And also patterns. You can buy a lot of patterns from the past on places like Etsy, especially like 60s, 70s, 80s. Etsy and eBay have a lot of old patterns. You can thrift them. But when you're talking about, oh, I'd like to dress Edwardian or in medieval times, or, you know, going back further in history, even just... Shut up! Man, I'm trying to record, dude! There are patterns that you can find by independent pattern makers, like on Etsy again, but they're mostly downloadable patterns, and then you have to like print them all off and then lay them all out, make sure they all line up perfectly, and then trace them out and cut them out. I'm terrified of doing this. I am going to try it in the future, and I'm a little bit more, you know, used to doing it, but at the moment I'm just terrified of even the thought of it. It means that you can support a lot of independent stores and things like that, but they are a little bit expensive, and also it's hard to find the very thing that you want to make. Whereas if you're making, say, the 40s and 50s are probably the most popular kind of era for vintage dress, and there is a lot of places that make patterns, but you probably will find that a lot of patterns that you find done by big companies will be costumes. So it'll be like a Civil War era, but it'll be like Gone with the Wind dress, and it won't be historically accurate, which is fine for people like me who are history bounders. But if you're somebody who actually wants to dress as if they lived back then, and I know a lot of the vintage gals do want to dress that way, then they have to go to like old books from the past and look on museum websites and things like that to find information about how pieces were made back in the day, and then try and figure out how to make it. It looks very difficult, very fiddly. It's something I would like to try and do, like way in the future in my sewing career, because at the moment I've made 2 skirts and that's it. These are just some of the pros and cons that I could think of today. There are lots of pros as well as lots of cons. I didn't want to make like a video that was very negative, because I don't like negativity. I don't bring that onto my channel at all. I like to always be positive, but I also want to be honest with you. And so if you're watching my videos because you're interested in dressing vintage, or you're just dipping your toe in, definitely be aware that the ways to dress vintage will probably end up with you buying things that are very expensive, either on Etsy or reproduction companies, or you will have to learn to sew, or you'll have to get into buying actual vintage clothing, and I've just started buying actual vintage pieces. So if you want to see me do a video about those pieces, don't forget to head down below and hit that subscribe button. I would really love to see more butterflies in the family, so don't forget to head down below and hit that subscribe button. Ring that little bell so you always know when I upload. I'm usually here Mondays and Fridays, my health permitting. I do my very best to be here with you. I so hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to head down and click that little like button so I know that you enjoy videos like this and I can bring more content like this to my channel. And lastly, leave me a comment because I love chatting to you. So don't forget, head down there, leave me a little comment, let's get chatting. I would love to make more friends with all of you beautiful, lovely butterflies. I hope that you're all staying safe. Don't forget Black Lives Matter, and it's Pride Month. So if you're in or out of the closet, you are beautiful and wonderful. You're a lovely butterfly and you're more than welcome in the family here. So I hope you'll stick around. I have made up a little playlist for you. I hope that you'll stay and watch those videos. I love you all. I hope you have a lovely week and I will see you next time. Bye. Mwah.